Marilyn Monroe may be a lesbian.
Okay.
This is the newest thing. Marilyn is making her way into the news again, and she's pretty much the biggest star that's ever lived because she's consistently been in the news for 50 years. There's a new book called Marilyn Monroe, My Little Secret, and in it reveals that she was sometimes attracted to women in a very big way. She allegedly had an affair with a 16-year-old girl.
That's a little uncomfortable. Okay.
And the 16-year-old girl, you might think, like, where in the world would a 16-year-old girl get access to Marilyn Monroe? But her dad was working at RKO at the time, so that's how she met Marilyn. And she discussed her sexuality with Marilyn Monroe. And I guess they were at Marilyn's house one night hanging furniture, and things got a little hot and heavy. And Marilyn started kissing her thigh and then her lips, and then they had they hooked up about 5 times.
Yeah, it was pretty steamy, but that one I wasn't as interested in. 16-year-old girl is a little uncomfortable, etc., right? But then you find out Marilyn Monroe, like, super bisexual. Lesbian's obviously not accurate because she married many men, obviously had sex with many men, and so we understand that. But Ben, I was pretty shocked at the long list of celebrity women that she had hooked up with. I mean, you know this stuff better than I do, but you might have known about it, but I didn't know that she had hooked up with, who's on that list there? We got
Marlene Dietrich.
Who apparently was also massively bisexual, which I didn't know about.
You know, there was you're talking about Hollywood in the 1950s, and these people experimented.
Yeah, but that's the interesting phenomenon that I want to talk about.
Elizabeth Taylor was on the list as
Elizabeth Taylor, I mean, how hot is that? Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe in a lesbian relationship? That one not as hot, but anyway.
That's Barbara Stanwyck.
I know, Barbara Stanwyck, but she, okay, sad day. And then there's Joan Crawford, which is also hot. I mean, and all these people are hooking up with one another. That's like the greatest untold story ever.
It's actually been told. And in fact,
that's the problem.
That's the reason we know about it right now.
Okay. But like that needs to be publicized more, like, because that could get people into old movies.
Well,
Totally.
Like if they knew that all those girls were hooking up with each other, all of a sudden everybody would be watching old movies.
And I can't think of any other reason to get into old movies.
It'd be better if it was actually in the old movies.
Well, then we're having a conversation.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing. There's this aura of old movies, and things have been the same forever, obviously. But sometimes we have to say that. There was gay people in 1925, but
there were.
It's the same culture there is today. People always say, "Oh, Hollywood is all gay," or "There's so many gay people in Hollywood that are in the closet," and it must have been about the same then.
Oh, well.
So there's no question that there's something about being a performer that leads apparently to a significant percentage of those people heading in that direction, or those people heading in the direction of Hollywood, obviously.
Well, let's.
Right.
I mean, first of all, just looking at it from my limited psychological point of view, these are people who are extremely good looking, generally extremely artistic, and massively filled, in Marilyn's case, to a real dramatic and dangerous extent, with self-doubt and huge vulnerabilities. And so, and they find each other, and the theater for especially a lot of men who were confused about their sexuality or unwilling to face their sexuality, drifted to the theater. It was a way to express themselves. It was a way to turn themselves into someone else when they were uncomfortable, unfortunately, with who they were.
You know what? That's a really great way of framing it, turning themselves into something else. And all of these books that have been written about Marilyn Monroe, talking about these lesbian affairs, etc., talk about her struggle with her identity. And so that's very understandable. And then she also apparently slept with a couple of female acting coaches. Again, if you're vulnerable and you don't know which way to go, and then there's this, authority figure, etc., and you're already predisposed in that direction, so that could happen. And then in the 16-year-old case, then she flips the roles, and she's the older one who's serving as a mentor to her and then seduces her. But I find it fascinating. I don't think a lot of Americans do know that. I think a lot of Americans would be very, very surprised to find out that Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor had hooked up.
First of all, I don't know. I didn't. I read the story. I don't know how credible this writer is. I mean, and maybe it's very credible, but I mean, there's a litany of Hollywood biographies that are filled with salacious details that probably aren't true.
That's fair.
This has, it seems to suggest a lot of women knowing what we know about Marilyn and the era in 1955, to hear that Marilyn may have slept with some bisexual Hollywood actresses, and Marilyn being bisexual herself, that doesn't, it actually doesn't shock me. I mean, considering sort of Marilyn's enormous vulnerabilities and the real difficulty that she had for so long, and she was tough to work with because she was so ultimately so hard on herself. And she was, again, she really struggled with that identity of being a sort of sex bot and desired to the extent she was by so many men.
Yeah, and look, let's
not everybody who loved her took advantage of her, but when you look at and a lot of guys, many of her husbands or the men she was involved with, truly loved her and were trying to help her. But, it's also a woman who sort of was, allowed herself to be exploited throughout her whole life and never knew quite how to handle that. She was.
But then, to be fair, she also exploited her own sexuality.
No question.
And,
no
and
question.
became enormously
she allowed
famous
that to happen to her own
She
benefit.
figured out how to use it, though.
Totally.
That's where her genius lied, I think. She figured out how to seduce the public. And we're still talking about her, so it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was her great talent, whether it was seducing the audience, as Jackie said, or seducing men, women, etc., older, younger.
She obviously got validation out of that.
Exactly.
And
That's
no question.
that's the other part.
And she got validation. It wouldn't surprise me that being desired by a woman also gave her validation.